If, like me, you don't really have much of a social life and you spend too much time on Twitter, you'd be forgiven for thinking that our society has become hopelessly divided, a place where insults and bad faith have replaced the art of debate and conversation. So this show is an attempt to prove this theory wrong. I want to talk to people who don't self-censor, who think it's better to be honest about what they believe, even if it's unpopular, and who don't demonise those who disagree with them. It's a pretty radical concept these days. And when it comes to the culture war, it can get pretty ugly out there. So I want to see if it's still possible for adults to discuss their differences robustly but politely, without calling each other fascists or throwing milkshakes. It's about getting the adults back in the room, basically. Every week, I'll have a panel which will mostly comprise of comedians. Why? Because historically, clowns have always told the truth. The court jester can hold the king to account without losing his head. So I thought it would be interesting to hear what they've got to say. Also, they're a lot cheaper. One of the strangest things about the time in which we live is that people like me, who believe in liberal values, who raise concerns about potential threats to free speech, are often dismissed as reactionaries, or as people who think that racism and sexism are somehow okay. I've even been called a homophobe, which is simply not true. Most of my ex-boyfriends have been gay. The truth is, I'm just very interested in the culture wars, not as a participant, but as a critic. But what exactly is a culture war? I mean, it sounds like a fist fight between Melvin Bragg and Mary Beard. And a recent poll revealed that about 80% of us don't actually know what a culture war is. But there's one going on right now. And it's affecting all of us, whether we like it or not. We've been pulled in, like Al Pacino in Godfather 3, totally against our will. But who's fighting this war? Well, there's a handy trick. If you want to spot the main antagonists, the most active culture warriors are those who tend to say that the culture war is a myth. Or if anyone criticises them, they'll accuse their critics of being the ones who are concocting the culture war. It's cunning, isn't it? And in truth, none of this is about left-wing or right-wing. It's come about because of the rise of a new identity-obsessed social justice movement, which achieves anything but social justice, and is fundamentally opposed to liberal values such as freedom of expression and open debate. It's a kind of secular religion, which now has overwhelming influence in our major cultural, educational and political institutions. It dominates the arts, it dominates the media, and although you may not understand why all of this has happened, that's something I'm struggling to understand myself, you will have seen the evidence of what I'm saying. For instance, most of us will know someone who has been disciplined at work for an unpopular opinion or a misconstrued joke. While the cliche of "you can't say anything anymore" is obviously not true, we're all just that little bit more careful about what we say around our friends or in the workplace. In some ways, that's a good thing. I mean, it means we're being more polite to each other, and we've reached a point where those who are openly racist, sexist or homophobic will become pariahs. Nothing wrong with that. But we've somehow got ourselves into a situation where decent people who feel no prejudice towards others are nonetheless punished, shamed, can have their livelihoods destroyed simply because someone doesn't agree with them. We call this cancel culture, which is as useful a metaphor as any to encapsulate this febrile climate. Now, thanks to cancel culture, you can get your revenge on your ideological opponents, bully them into submission, harass them, threaten them, libel them, insult them, get them fired, trash their reputation, damage their mental health, and you can do all of this while claiming to be the good guy. It's quite a system. Quite apart from cancel culture, there have been other changes too since the social justice ideology went mainstream. Just little things here and there. And taken individually, these incidents seem trivial, something to laugh at, but not worth getting upset about. But taken together, they reveal a general regressive shift actuated by those who use the language of progress. It's why mainstream broadcasters keep deleting scenes from old comedy shows that they've decided might upset you. It's why writers and artists from the past are being denounced for attitudes that we no longer approve of, but were common in their lifetime. It's why the police are routinely investigating citizens for non-crime. It's why every day we're seeing bizarre headlines in the media, such as law student facing disciplinary action because she said women have vaginas, and can my children be friends with white people? And it's all happened rather quickly, hasn't it? If you'd have shown these headlines to anyone just 10 years ago, they would have thought it was a joke, or perhaps excerpts from some novel set in some weird dystopian future. Why would anyone want to segregate children by race? Why would someone be investigated for stating biological facts? And why would anyone consider this progress? And yet, here we are. It's really tempting to just ignore this kind of nonsense and hope it'll just go away. But if the last 5 years have taught us anything, it's that this is not going anywhere. And the more we try to ignore it, the worse it gets. We've got to discuss these issues. We've got to restate the case for social liberalism and for free speech, because if we don't, these problems are just going to escalate. And I'm not trying to be alarmist. I don't think we're hurtling towards a future of gulags anytime soon. But it does ring a few alarm bells when a young woman who fled from North Korea and is now a student at Columbia University is saying that she sees a lot of similarities between her homeland and the American education system. In an interview this week, Yeonmi Park said that she had expected, on arriving at an American campus, to be interacting with open-minded academics and intellectually curious students, but instead was being, and I quote, forced to think the way they want you to think. North Korea was pretty crazy, she said, but not this crazy. I'm not convinced that things are that bad, but when someone from North Korea thinks you've got a problem with growing authoritarianism, you should probably pay attention. But look, if all this is starting to sound a bit earnest, let me reassure you, for all the disturbing examples of cancel culture and the threats to free speech we'll be covering on this show, we're also going to be looking at the more frivolous stories. And however intimidating culture warriors might be, sometimes they're just plain silly. Like the Washington Post article that went viral this week, which argued that we need to change the names of birds because they might have racist connotations. This is just one example of this new mania to purge the past of all unpalatable aspects, a kind of revisionism that we've all grown accustomed to. And it's such a disappointment to find out that birds are racist. I always thought as a species they were quite fond of migration. Turns out they're just a bunch of feathery Enoch Powells. But it's not just birds, of course. I mean, recently there have been articles in the mainstream media assuring us that soap dispensers are racist too. So are the Muppets, the British countryside, fonts, swimming, mathematics, and even Bernie Sanders' mittens. It can all get quite confusing. And not even Middle-earth can escape the impact of the culture wars. If you think you're going to sit down and read The Hobbit as a light form of escapism, forget about it. The Tolkien Society has a summer seminar coming up in a fortnight, and some of the lectures, they just sound incredible. We've got Gondor in Transition, a brief introduction to transgender realities in Lord of the Rings. The Invisible Other, Tolkien's dwarf women and the feminine lack. And my favourite, destabilising cis-hetero-aminonormativity in the works of Tolkien. And if you don't know what that means, don't worry, neither do they.